Okay, I want to make this quick video on how to create figures or drawings for a software invention. It's very easy to make figures for, say, a toothpaste holder or a new type of shovel. It's very easy to show what the invention is. If your invention is a software application or a mobile app, it's a little bit more tricky and not as straightforward to include those in your figures. So in general, software figures must show the process. So the first thing you have to do when you're thinking about how to protect your software is try to break it down in your head into one or two or three unique processes that you don't think anyone else is really doing that's important for your invention. And so that's actually not as easy as it sounds. When I take on a new software project, it takes me a while to try to figure out what it is you're doing that's new and unique, how that can be broken down into a couple steps or processes, and then we're going to actually make those steps or processes a figure, usually through some sort of flow chart, and we'll go over some examples of those. So you're definitely going to want to have these flow charts as part of your patent application if you have a software invention. Some optional figures you can include, and it's usually a good idea to include these, is what I like to call system components. So if you think about your software application and as it's running, what other components is it communicating with? So if you have a mobile application, is there some sort of larger program running on a server somewhere in the cloud? And so you're going to have your mobile device communicating with the server in the cloud, and maybe there's a wireless antenna in between the mobile device and the cloud, and you have some sort of data network. If you think about all the physical components that go into making your software application work, you can kind of draw those all out as a system figure, and I'll show you an example of that. The next thing you might want to include as a sample figure is what we call just a block diagram, which is a really simple representation of either a server, or a computer. So if your software application is primarily going to be running on a server, what are the pieces that make up a server? There's a processor, there's some sort of data storage unit or a memory unit, there's some sort of network interface cards, some way to transfer data in and out of the server, and then same thing for a cell phone or a mobile device. What are the key components that make up your mobile device? And we'll show those, give you some examples of those coming up in the next figures. The tip that I have here is to don't write your process out from the point of view as a human. It's really, it's probably fairly standard for people to want to write it as you would be using the software as a human. So first you might log into the application, then you might view your friends list. But that's not the proper way to write the flow chart. You're going to want to write it from the point of view from the server or from the processor that's going to be doing the work. So maybe the first thing the processor does is it receives some sort of query. So maybe it receives a query to update a friends list or search for a certain friend from your friends list or from a database. And so just keep that in the back of your mind, that you're going to want to write the steps from the point of view as if you were the computer or you were the processor doing the work. So here's my first example. This is a really simple flow chart. As you can see, it starts with a little circle here that says start, and then the process ends here. And so in this example, every time there's a decision point or a question, they're showing it as a circle, and then every time there's a step, they're showing it as a box. And usually when you have a decision point, you have two possible choices, either yes or no, or true or false. And we'll show this again in another example coming up. Here's a more typical example of what you'd see in a patent application for a flowchart. In this case, they've actually included unique strings or code that you might put into the software application. That's not required for the patent. This was a little bit of an overkill, but sometimes if you're a real software developer, it helps you to think in terms of strings, or how the software would actually go through one of these processes. And so it helps people sometimes to put these strings into the process flow chart. Now in this case, they have their decision points represented as a diamond shape, and that's more common in patent language, and also when you're writing flow charts. And so this is just really a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, possibly 7, 8, 9 step process. And again, the hardest part is really figuring out what those key steps are that your software program is going through, and how do you write those out as a simple process flow chart. And the best advice I have is just kind of look through as many of these as you can. Search for similar patents in your area, look through as many of these charts as you can, and you'll kind of get a feel for, understanding for how much detail you need to disclose in your own patent figures. So those were the flow charts. As I said, some of the optional figures you can include are the system diagrams. So here's one I've made that has a user, which I've labeled as 101, a mobile device, which I've labeled as 102, and then in your detailed description part, you can say a mobile device might be a laptop, it might be a smartphone, it might be a tablet computer. You have the option of kind of defining these terms on your own, which is kind of nice. We have a cloud here that I've represented as a cloud. We have a data access point, which I've labeled as 103. We have a server labeled as 104, a database labeled as 105, and for this particular application, this allowed a user with their mobile device to connect to some social media servers, and so I've chosen to represent that as a large server with some of the social media icons. So you can really make it look however you want. The goal is to kind of show some of the key players or key components that are part of your software system. And here's an even more simple representation of some key components for a software system. The last optional figures, and these are just some common ones that I found in other patents that have been published. Here's a really rough block diagram of a server and some of the components or pieces that might go into a server. And here is a rough example, or a really basic example, of a mobile device. And so the mobile device in this case has an antenna to connect to a data network. It has a processor, it has a data store, which is just another way of saying it has some sort of hard drive or some way to store data. It has an operating system, and it may have programs such as applications. The reason why people include these type of block diagrams into their patent application is because most of the time the patent office gives you a little bit of pushback on some of these business methods and software method patents, and they really like it to be tied to some sort of specific machine or apparatus. And so by including these diagrams in here, it's kind of just another way that you're tying your process into something tangible or something physical, and so that's why people include them in their patent application. I know I went over that pretty quickly. Feel free to email me if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to help you out. Thank you.